So let's talk about the next generational archetype. So we've got the prophets who were born in spring. They come of age. There's abundance. There's that spiritual awakening in summer that they go into in their young adulthood. And then during their young adulthood, the nomad archetype energy is born in summer, the season of summer. Now we get into autumn, and the energy that's born here is yet another dominant energy. It's not recessive or diminished like the nomads are. This is a more prevalent or prominent generational energy.
Right. Yeah. It's highly influential. And this is the archetypal energy of the hero. So unsurprisingly, the hero generation is what we call millennials. And so millennials are born during an unraveling. And a
harvest.
And a harvest, right, exactly.
So a lot of abundance.
Abundance and the ability to pay attention to children, but at the same time, a big question mark about how it's all going to pan out culturally, right? Yeah. And so the heroes, the reason why they become heroes archetypically is because they enter young adulthood during winter. So they're born in autumn, but they enter young adulthood in winter. And winter is that time period of secular crisis. So who gets us through a crisis? Well, usually secular crisis is war, oftentimes, physical war. And who fights the wars? Heroes do. Heroes go fight wars. And so who do we throw at war? Young people, right? We throw people who are not little kids and not middle age. We throw young adults into war, into battle. And so this archetypal energy of the hero is required. So during an unraveling time period, like you said, it's also a time period of harvest and abundance. And unlike that spiritual awakening, this time period now goes back to paying attention to children. It goes back to believing that they're important and that we should be giving them some credence.
Yeah.
We end up creating a sense of, because our institutions have been reevaluated, because we have reevaluated the kind of people we want to be during the spiritual awakening, and we want to make sure that these ideals are very much carried out and carried forth, then we tell the hero generation as little kids, it's your job to save the world. You are our heroes, okay? We've figured out who we want to be during a spiritual awakening, and it's up to you, little kids, to make it happen. And this is part what prophets do. They speak out their ideals. They speak out how they believe the world should be. And so they tell the prophets oftentimes tell an entire generation of young burgeoning heroes, you are heroes and it is your job to save the world.
Yeah, and this is the message many young adults got as children. It's your job to save the environment. It's your job to save social things. It's all up to you, and you've got a big job ahead of you. And that puts a lot of pressure on a generation, quite frankly.
It's kind of horrible when you think about it.
Yeah.
Every generation has its own stuff. You know, Gen Xers, the sad thing is that they were all told that they were little demon children and they had to let themselves in the house. But in some ways, this idea that like all of you have to band together and save the world, I mean, the pressure is outrageous. Yeah. And you can tell that there's a whole generation of people who are, millennials, who are still in young adulthood, but now pushing into midlife, right? The oldest of the millennials are now starting to push into midlife. The youngest of them are still in young adulthood. But this age range of people who believed it was their job to save the world, well, of course you're going to look for a battle. Yeah. Because you're told that was what you were made for, is battles. You're heroes, so go fight battles. And you can see a generation of people who are looking for battles to fight.
Now, just as a side note, the word millennial, the label for this generation, actually was coined by Strauss and Howe in their book Millennials Rising. And I remember my dad had it on his coffee table when I was like in the late 1990s, and seeing that book, maybe it was the early 2000s, it was somewhere like over 20 years ago. I saw this book and I flipped through it even at the time. There are a lot of predictive things about what we're seeing now with this generation. And just imagine a generation that's prepared to save the world. It's almost a battle-ready generation. Like grab your weapons, whatever those are, metaphorically speaking. Prepare for battle because you're going to have to fight to make sure we're all going to be okay. And so what happens to a generation that's preparing for war that may not naturally come, one could argue that generation is potentially going to create that. It's going to find it even where it's not there.
Yeah.
And I think some of the things that we might be dealing with in our world today could be an archetypical generational pattern being played out of, I don't know where the war is. I don't know what to do. And that creates anxiety if there's nothing to put that hero attention to. Maybe I should create some disturbance. I need to create the drama to have the war, quote unquote, to be able to handle the archetypical energy that I have inside of me.
Well, and it's also to some extent, and this is why I think these generations blame previous generations, not inappropriately, that to some extent they also are in that space because there was marching orders. Like prophet generations speak out their ideals. This is what we figured out about who we want to be during our spiritual awakening. And now we're going to, groom an entire generation of people who will go fight this battle for us. And so in some ways it's a marching orders scenario. And it's older people who start these battles, right? It's not the millennials. They're primed and ready to go get into whatever fray because they feel like that's what they were told their job to do, was to do, is save the world. So how do I save the world? And it's older generations that go, you save it in these ways. And both boomers and Xers have certain things that they think should be the case, right? That like, this is how the world is supposed to be. So make it so, right? And Xers are a little bit more likely, like these nomads are more likely to try to go handle it themselves, but they're independent. The hero generations are a little bit more collectivist, right? They get together. They go, we're going to go fight as brothers in arms together. And so there's a little bit more, and that's one of the generational schisms, is that millennials and Xers very much clash, butt heads on this. Do we have a more collectivist view or do we have a more independent view? And again, because life is a paradox, both. You need both of them, and you need them in equal measure, and you need them both represented.